Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to BritCham Indonesia webinar series in Leadership and Adaptability. I'm Asti, Events Coordinator at BritCham Indonesia. This BritCham webinar series is proudly in collaboration with AgilityShip and supported by our sponsor, BP. And today we are going to discuss the 12 leadership practices for sustainable business, career, and life with our speaker, Dr. Paul Aitken. He is the founder of Mastering Leadership Agility UK and MLA Singapore Pte Ltd. This session will be moderated by Chris Ren, the Executive Director of BritCham Indonesia. And before we start, let me review the functionality of the Zoom webinar. So please be informed that today's webinar is being recorded, and we will be able to share a link with you when it's available after the event is complete. All participants will be muted to avoid background noises that may distract you from listening to this webinar, and also to enable our speaker to present without interruption. We have activated the Q&A box located at the bottom center of your screen. So if you have any questions, please type them into the box, and we will have time for Q&A session at the end to answer your questions. Okay, now I'm going to hand the screen over to Chris Ren, our Executive Director, who is going to start today's webinar. The screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Asti. I just had a little technical issue. I hope everybody can hear me. A very good day to you. If you are in Indonesia, then I guess that means good afternoon, approaching evening. And if you are UK repositioned, then a very good morning to you. It's a pleasure for BritCham to host this further addition to our webinar series on leadership and adaptability. It's a particular pleasure to welcome this collaboration with AgilityShip and also our supporting sponsor, BP. This particular offering was very specifically targeted at executive level people within corporates and also senior managers. And that really relates to the content and its depth. Dr. Paul Aitken, who'll be taking this session, he's the founder of AgilityShip, as Asti had mentioned, and has spent the vast majority of his career in executive coaching and consulting in adaptive leadership, and mainly exclusively to executives and all around the world. There is an opportunity, as Asti had mentioned, to punch in questions as we go, and we'll deal with them at appropriate times, but mostly we'll set things back to the end of the program. And there'll be plenty of opportunity for interaction with Dr. Paul Aitken. Some people will think, being targeted at agility in disruptive times, some might think that this is specifically because of COVID. Actually not. We began these discussions back in October and November of last year, and it just so happens that there is a very particular disruptive time that's present and among us right now, so its relevance and context could never be heightened. With that, I would like to pass over the baton to Dr. Paul as your host.
Selamat datang. Well, welcome everyone. I hope you can hear me, and welcome to this 1-hour webinar. I wanted to first of all say that today I will just be giving you an introduction to leadership and adaptability. As you'll see with the slide deck, there's a lot more to learn about this. So I won't be reading through every slide, but I will alert you to the use of some of the information in the slides as we go through. And the other thing I wanted to say is I hope you all haven't been too badly affected personally by the COVID-19 disruption. Here on Exmoor, which is a national park, life pretty much rolls on, but it's not the same for the rest of the world, I know. We wouldn't be running this webinar, I guess. We'd be trying to do face-to-face. So it's all changed for everyone. And now I'd just like to go into the presentation. Yes. So as Chris said, the session really it is helpful for you in terms of responding to the COVID-19 disruption. But there's a strap line here which says "Prepare the unprepared for change," and I'm afraid that that COVID-19 is just one of many disruptions that we're going to face in our careers, lives, and businesses. And so we've been working on these 12 practices for some time now. The great financial crash was the first one, and again, executives found this material and learning useful. Asti, thank you. So we're just dealing with COVID-19, and shouldn't forget that actually there are two more highly globally disruptive challenges heading our way. Well, they're already here. I mean, the first is the fourth industrial revolution, and particularly the rise of robots. And the potential loss of jobs, but also the potential for creating new products and services. And the same with the global climate crisis and species extinction. And this will potentially disrupt supply chains. So it's a world of disruption. I mean, people say to me that well, we'll get back to some sort of normal. Well, I would suggest to you that normal will be constant disruption. Thank you, Asti. So this connection between the changes, the global changes, and particularly AI. There's some common things emerging, and this relates not just to humans, but also to the natural environment, and particularly in this example, as you can see, AI is being used in really creative ways. And the strap line here is that we're all looking to be more healthy, humane, and sustainable. So optimizing well-being, not just of animals, but also humans, is particularly important during a significant change, and we need to be prepared for that, and ourselves as executives, but also we need to be able to prepare others for what's heading their way. And we have two revolutions happening at the same time, one in agriculture and one in the industrial revolution. And remember, we've got quantum computing to come. So this is all going to impact on daily business life and the way we think about our careers. But nothing's new, right? I mean, a lot of leadership isn't new. Well, we've known for a long time that species survival depends on adaptability. It's not necessarily the most intelligent. So you can learn about leadership, you can read definitions of leadership, but actually your practical ability to adapt to changing situations is what matters. So yeah, exams matter as well, intellect does matter, but actually doing leadership adaptability is the most important thing. And as I said before, there are opportunities created for businesses because of it's an opportunity for reinvention and repurposing. And this is a Canadian car manufacturer's response to the current situation, COVID-19, because it's predicting that customers will want perhaps to travel solitary in and out of cities. There's distinct advantages as well, of course, for congested cities, limited parking spaces. And this, of course, is driven, this car itself, the Solo, is powered by only by electricity. So for every challenge, there's also an opportunity. And it'll be our inventiveness and our entrepreneurship which will make the difference going forward. So I just wanted to be clear about some of the definitions because there's quite a bit of confusion out there. What I'm not concentrating on today is leader. Here you can see Richard Branson. Richard Branson is a forceful personality. Unfortunately, even if you did want to be like him, you couldn't be because you don't share his personality, unless of course you've got some genetic connection with him. So it's very difficult to change personality. So what we're more interested in, and think it's much more helpful to offer to executives, is to unpack this word leadership, and particularly adaptive leadership. So just go back a minute, Asti. So leadership for us is concentrating on the interactions between people. So the picture on the right-hand side is what are the knowledges, communications, relationships that are happening in these interactions, in these connections. And when you unpack that, then you can actually look at it in terms of practices and not personality. And of course, adaptive responses to changing situations is the key learning. Thanks, Asti. And just briefly, just so that we remind ourselves why agility matters more than size. I mean, size does matter. And I suspect following COVID-19, there'll be a lot of consolidations, mergers and acquisitions as smaller players in the market fall over because of financial difficulties, perhaps employees leaving or whatever. But this means that larger organizations also can't be complacent because there will always be small players. Uber is an example, Just Eat is another example. There are always small inventive players looking around to snap and bite chunks out of your market segment and therefore impact on the business. So within businesses, we need to retain that early sense of entrepreneurship that many businesses built their global reputations on. And we also know that company lifespans are reducing all the time. So the turnover in terms of that is increasing, probably increasing in line with the level of disruption that we have in the world. Now, there are two forms of adaptive leadership which we alert people to in terms of their learning. The first is agility in the moment. I don't know whether we have any sailors out there, but agility in the moment means being able to respond instantly when something changes. And if you've been on a yacht and the wind and the waves come up, there's a metaphor here for business, and you're not prepared for that significant disruption, then in this case, the worst case scenario is the boat can tip over and people die. Now, not every business is in a life or death situation, but the preparedness and the practice that these crew members on the yacht have to have, so that when that wind changes, they know instantly who's good at what, and that's the collective leadership bit. Who within the team is best placed to operate what on the yacht to make it safe, so they can continue their journey. So that's agility in the moment. And the other part of leadership adaptability is leaders building a culture of sustainable agility in their organizations. Because if you don't do that, this is what can happen. And Kodak is just one example. It's doing really well, and suddenly there's a change in the marketplace, customer expectations, and in this case, combined with technology, and suddenly their market share and the viability of the company gets destroyed. So, ironically, you're at your most vulnerable when you're at your most successful, and that's why having a constant culture of agility really helps. So I'm not going to read all this out to you, but just to say that our working definition and what it does is that by knowing one another's practices, you can continuously work out why, what, and how you can create value, continue to create value in the human and natural world context. And as I said before, what people are going to be looking out for post-COVID is the way brands and companies also respond to some of the human issues and challenges and the natural world impacts and effects that we're having through what we do. Very brief introduction now as to where this originated from. I wrote this book with my colleague Malcolm Higgs in 2010. And out of writing it and doing all the research, we came to the conclusion that there were certain capabilities, as we called them then, 10 capabilities in this case, which became 12 practices. And we're not so much interested in defining what change is or what leaders are in terms of their personality. We want to know more interestingly and more helpfully how to develop and practice agility. So since then, we've been working all around the world. Asti, if you just move on. We've been working all around the world, testing out the research and development and then the delivery of the 12 leadership agility practices through businesses. And these were some of the companies that helped us with the original R&D. We ran a simulation for a week. We ran a company for a week. And Toyota we went on to work with because we wanted to match their their process continuous improvement system. We wanted to draw some parallels with the people continuous improvement system, bearing in mind that people drive processes. And we have that case study which shows evidence throughout the Toyota culture. I'm sure you'll agree Toyota have stayed at the top of their market segment for a long time now and must be doing something well in terms of sustainability. We have that case study, but I don't have time to share that with you on this occasion. Perhaps that's something that we can do later on. And enterprises and business schools around the world have used our methodology and our learning and our application to business life. It's important that we tested this out cross-culturally because you're never sure whether there are any cultural impacts on learning materials and learning process. And then just another thing about me, because this came to play as well in determining the idea of leadership practices. This is me, aged about 2, kicking a football. It occurred to me as we were thinking about leadership, that leadership, like football, is a set of practices. And here I'm about to kick this ball with my right foot, not very well at that age, as you can see, because I'm leaning up against the wall. I haven't got too much balance. Yeah, I'm a football association coach, and actually I've drawn on quite a lot of that in terms of shaping up with our team the 12 practices. Because it's practice of practices which produces elite adaptive performance. And although some people say, you need 10,000 hours, and maybe that's right, but you definitely need more than just being a one-off genius. And particularly if you're trying to build team performance, you need to practice obviously together. So yeah, and then more recently, moving on, Asti, more recently, actually last week, I discovered that some of you may not know who these two people are. So on your left is Jurgen Klopp, manager of Liverpool, and on your right is Lee Richardson. Chris likes this because he's a Liverpool fan like me. I looked at what they were doing in terms of helping Liverpool stay at the top of their performance. And they use these 4 principles you can see on the left: reflect, prepare, perform, and refine. Lee Richardson, by the way, is a sports performance psychologist. And I've also worked with Dave Brailsford, who was the UK Olympic cycle coach as well. But these phases of reflect, prepare, perform, and refine, I suddenly discovered that this cycle of readiness was anomalous to actually to our circle of continuous improvement. And just so that we're clear, we can actually create adaptive leadership at the personal, team, enterprise, and indeed community level. That's because we're practicing practices. As I said, it's not about personality. So we must start with identifying a clearer identity for ourselves. This is our brand, our purpose. And our brands are going to be looked at very carefully by employees and customers after this crisis, particularly in terms of the way that the companies have responded to dealing with all the issues raised by customers and indeed employees as they go on furlough, as customers find that their deliveries aren't turning up or they have to do it in a different way. So how people are treated and our purpose is very important. We also then need to find out what our priorities are in terms of our innovation. Innovating products and services, I'm sure you're already doing. We just need to keep that momentum going. But there's no point having a strategy unless you can successfully implement it. And if we do all that right, then we can become pioneers and that can enhance our reputation, either at an individual team, business or community level. And so again, because we concentrate on practices, your learning and my learning is a lifelong journey. And you can see here that we can apply adaptive leadership learning and development to different age groups. Of course, today we're concentrating on number 3. But you can see some of the building blocks in the earlier phases of our life, particularly these people-to-people communications, relationship building, knowledge creation, sharing, and dissemination, which we really ought to start with when people are very young. And in fact, this idea came from some senior managers, directors, and CEOs that I worked for, who suddenly discovered that they could actually use these practices with their children at home. And again, you can actually use them in many ways. So those of you who want to become an executive coach can use this framework. Internally, you can use them for talent management, career coaching, management team building, strategic management retreats, and community and nation building. And Chris will say a little bit more about the final one later, because as I said to you before, you're just receiving an overview today. And this proposal is currently sitting with the Prime Minister of Samoa. So this is a nation building. It's an adaptive leadership capability and capacity program that we've put to the Prime Minister of Samoa. And it's based on some of the work that I did with the former Prime Minister of New Zealand, Helen Clark, who I worked with for 6 years under her reign to build civil service and private sector CEO capability across New Zealand. And again, you can see that you have to contextualize this culturally. So it's very important for the Prime Minister in terms of their identity to follow Faha Samoa. Faha Samoa just means the Samoan way. And so obviously here, the cultural context is different, but the process is the same. And what they would like to become is a Pacific Island role model. Samoa is just one of the Pacific Islands, and it wants to become a pioneer and a role model for developing leadership adaptability across its nation. So our improvement framework always starts with diagnostics before we concentrate on them. Well, what is the actual business leadership challenge here that we're trying to apply our 12 practices to? And so on, we go around that circuit. But we start with diagnostics. Next slide, please, Asti. And so you can actually do a self-assessment of your 12 leadership agility practices, and it will produce a list like this. So for example, in this particular executive, performance challenge is the one that they're currently strongest in. It's the one they're practicing most, and that may be to do with their current role. It also may be to do with what they've learned beforehand. But performance challenge is the practice that they're doing the most of. And remember, this is about your daily practice, and that's just a sample of the report, which we can move on from. And this is a heat map of a regional managers team in Southeast Asia, showing the membership of that team and all their various strengths and weaknesses across all 12 practices. And again, this is at the team level now. This is collective leadership adaptability. We see that performance challenge is what they're doing most of. And agility resilience is what they're doing least of. Now, there's a quick story here. This is a luxury brand retail organization. And they're very focused on KPIs because, as you know, retail is a challenging market. So they were focusing the culture on just hitting higher and higher KPIs, but without really building any agility resilience, because they weren't concentrating on the reinvention repurposing side at the same time. So, you know, just trying to do more of the same with the people wasn't bringing results. And in fact, the outcome was that a lot of staff were leaving through burnout. Thanks, Asti. And so this is our wheel of development and learning, and it goes counterclockwise. And before we go I'm just going to highlight the main sections because we'll see some of the detail afterwards. What you have to remember in the white space here is disruptive change. So this cycle of readiness, of continuous learning, of continuous improvement, exists in the context of disruptive change, which is the white space. As I said before, we first of all need to reflect on how fit for purpose are we currently? You know, is our brand standing up to all the challenges that are coming out from competitors and the expectations of customers? Have we really thought about that in relation to the future, which is the what? And you can see that for each of these phases, there are certain practices which drive the improvement through each of these phases of personal, team, and organizational development. So for reflecting and getting clarity of purpose, those are those 4 practices there, and I'll come to the detail of that later. And then we need to work out, once we've worked out our purpose, we need, why do we exist? We need to work out, well, what are we going to concentrate on in terms of our product and service line? What are our priorities? What do we need to create that's different to what we're currently doing, or what's out there in the marketplace? What can we reinvent? What can we repurpose? Like the solo car example that I gave you earlier, which, by the way, was an earlier version of that, was developed in the 1960s. Perhaps its time has come. So we can always look at retrofitting some of our products and services for these changing times as well. So there's a whole set of practices there which are more to do with learning and adaptation. And of course, making sure that we've got the right people with the right skills, particularly the right leadership capabilities, to be able to move to the strategy execution stage, the how. Executing strategy requires lots and lots of communication. So the next 3 practices in this green phase here really major in on those. Communicate is the watchword when you're trying to make sure that people are clear about purpose. They're now clear about priorities, the replenish phase, and now they're clear about how they need to implement this strategy. And finally, I'll just go back and see. And the final phase is the reputation phase. And as I said before, very important not to take your foot off the gas. You need to continue to drive for performance, but at the same time, make sure that you're looking outward to the changes outside of this space. Again, in terms of global disruptions, customer expectations, and so on. So this resilience, this not becoming arrogant or complacent, driving performance, excelling at what you do, but changing habits that are getting in the way at the same time. Thanks, Asti. And I'm not going to go through all these. You'll have time to digest these after the webinar. These are the definitions. What I might say though is that for the COVID-19, and I'll talk about this a little bit more later, for the COVID-19 situation, it's very important as executives that you concentrate on personal values sensitivity and emotional intelligence. Personal values sensitivity is the motivational practice. You need to, particularly because a lot of people are working remotely, and therefore their personal lives are actually interacting with their working patterns. You need to make sure that you know at a real level of detail what drives different people, so that they're actually going to continue to focus on what you want them to do and performance. And there are only six different motivational drivers that we all have as humans. And obviously we don't have time to go into that today, but you need to learn A, what they are, and B, who within your team is strongest, wants to be motivated through those different values. Emotional intelligence is so important. We need to show our compassion, our caring, our humanity. We need to be human, you know. This is a time where we can really draw on our human skills. The robots might be doing a lot of the work in the background, but unless we're maintaining our emotional connections with people, listening to their concerns, creating excitement about futures, there's that side of this as well. But really tuning in to how people are feeling is fundamental at the moment. If when things do return to a semblance of normality, you're going to have everyone on board still wanting to promote your organization and your brand. Okay, we can just keep going through these. Thanks. So there are all the definitions of each of the 12 practices. And this is a table. Again, I won't go through all the detail. I'll just focus on the first two because they're the most important at the moment. So you must remember that what you do on a daily basis in terms of your leadership practice has different types of influence, impact, and it creates different types of agility. For example, personal values sensitivity allows you, as I already said, to influence people's motivational level, because you can deliver messages through other people's personal values, not just your own. And what I find is working with CEOs at the moment is that the ones that seem to be most successful are the ones that move away from what I call generic management speak and really try and speak to the heart of people's different motivations, express that humanity. And by doing that, you will release discretionary motivation. That's motivation on and beyond what you'll get from people just because you're paying them to hit targets. I mean, paying people is going to be difficult anyway, perhaps for some of you. Or paying as much, or really just using that as your only tool in your motivational armory. You're going to have to find different ways of raising people's motivations. And if you can do that, you can adjust how you can connect with different people depending on those motivations. And there again, we've got lots of other examples here for you. The personal issues, these might be ways of spotting whether your leadership practice is actually working at the moment. It might show you what some of the gaps are. You can see as well that we also run experiential programs around this learning, and that's particularly important when we're doing youth leadership development. So have a look at those personal issues and see if you're facing any of them. Then you'll be able to identify which of the 12 practices you may not be as strong in at the moment. Okay, and there's another table to help you with that. This one focusing on any workplace improvements that you feel that you want to concentrate on from what you've spotted. By the way, the first way to change is to be aware of the changes and aware of your own leadership influence and impact. So start with self-leadership before you do leadership of others and leadership through others. Best to be aware of the impacts you're having, because if you're not, then it's very difficult for you to change appropriately and switch between these practices depending on what's required. Now, this is an example of some CEOs, some very recent, in fact, within the last month, I believe, some CEO to CEO advice that's on the web. This is a YPO.org is a chief executives club, trying to help one another, obviously, through these difficult times, particularly in relation to COVID-19. And these were some tips and hints that CEOs were sending to one another. I won't go through them all, because what I'd rather do is just to map these onto the 12 practices, and let's see if this, let's call it uneducated advice, is matching the 12 practices. Well, certainly the CEOs are doing something in the personal values sensitivity space, because they are saying that that companies should be protecting employee well-being, encouraging and embracing working from home and virtual meetings, and that's what I said. Because you can't concentrate, because you can't do your normal embracing through face-to-face, you're going to have to find, through communication, through projects, through delegations, you're going to have to find ways to match what you delegate to how people are feeling and how people are motivated. And that has to be thought through in a level of detail. There are 6 different leadership approaches, communication styles, for example, that you can do, which relate to emotional intelligence. But first of all, staying calm, right? Well, yeah, I mean, if you're not calm, then who else is going to be? People take lessons, they watch. We get most of our information about leadership role modeling from watching, not what people say, but what they do. So that emotional contagion is very important. And if you're calm and also excited about future plans as well, remember both sides of the emotional intelligence equation, then you're more likely to have calm team members and a calm working environment. Well, they're doing some sense-make giving. This is the coming up with the strategy and then telling a story about it. So they're doing some anticipation of what might be next for the business, but also planning for the worst. So communication is vital. And if you haven't been sending out personal messages, I'm sure you all have, it's very important to do it. But don't just send out generic management speak communications. Tell a compelling story about how you're dealing with the current situation, and more importantly, what you're going to do in the next 6 to 12 months. Before you make any critical, before you make any critical decisions, also think through the consequences. Life is interconnected. If you make a corporate decision, it's likely to affect your colleagues, different parts of the business. So, as a leadership team, using your adaptability, make sure that you think it through at a systemic level before you make any major changes. Because what you don't want is to make the disruption worse for the customer and employees. So there's just some examples, and you can see that the gaps at the moment, well, access capability, they don't seem to be alerted to the fact that you'll have to be wanting to trust different teams, different leadership teams, distributed leadership teams across the business. You need to know what capabilities they have, who's best at leading on what project during this time. So accessing capability is all well and good, but if you don't know what the capabilities are, just like going back to the yachting metaphor, you have to know who's best at what, and in a level of detail that you can then trust individuals to get on and deliver to the best of their abilities. Next slide, Esti. Cultural competence is also missing, or they haven't really thought about it enough. Now, different nations, different cultures will be responding to COVID differently. That's mainly because cultural rules and norms are different. Chris will know that I think in the UK, it's been a lot looser. The rules and regulations have been slower, looser, more open to individual interpretation, whereas in Singapore, for example, the rules have been very clear, and I might say in New Zealand as well. And if you want to have a look at adaptive leadership in an individual, I would recommend that you follow the work and life of Jacinda Ardern, the current Prime Minister of New Zealand, who's been brilliant at cultural competence. They're also, you can see here, perhaps not paying attention to performance challenge. And it's very important to keep people focused on the business outcomes, but also to make sure that you're encouraging them, inviting them to look for these new changes, new expectations emerging in the marketplace, so you can create this resilience through your adaptive leadership. I won't go through this slide, but just to say that independent research has shown that if you use more of these, the more you use these 12 practices, if you 10% increase in the use of adaptive leadership practices on a daily basis will increase emotional commitment to the business by 4%, and that's independent research. That's a great way of making sure that you build that emotional commitment, not just through COVID, but for the future. So finally, just some very quick points. Must-dos for disruptive times. Be aware, know in detail what your leadership agility practices are. Be thoughtful, reflect on the daily impact, influence, and agility your leadership practice is producing. Be collaborative. Make sure you have lots of conversations so that you know one another's leadership practices and who's best to do what. Be resourceful so that the delegation works and you draw on information, knowledge, relationships appropriately. And finally, of course, maintain your agility by paying most attention at the moment to people's diverse motivations and emotions. Well, that's all from me this morning. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you, Asti, for operating the technology. And Chris, over to you for questions.